Let's go ahead and get started. So my name is Curtis Bean. I'm the founder and executive director of Art of War Project. We are graciously in this building because VFW Post 1 donates space to us and a lot of other veteran organizations to allow us to function. So just keep that in mind and how gracious they are for that. So Art of War is a active community where we do everything from visual arts, photography, painting, printmaking, anything in that realm up until wellness, including meditation and yoga. So I really found it necessary to put on this event because there's a huge gap in wellness for vets. A lot of vets are not given a lot of options to attack PTSD and TBI with healthy and sustainable options. So that's why we're here tonight, and hopefully we'll give everybody some tools to take home with them and be able to have a better function daily. So our special guest tonight is Dr. Sue Sicily. She's the leading researcher on MMJ for PTSD, and she's going to give us a slide presentation and talk a little bit more about that. And we're going to follow that up with Matt Call here. He is a great veteran advocate for PTSD, MMJ for PTSD, and he's going to do a little presentation and talk about his experience as well. And following that, we'll have a question and answer. So we'll have an open panel. If you guys have any questions, we'll address those, and we'll go through those as they come in. And afterwards, we can just hang out and socialize, network a little bit more, and then we'll get out of here. So without further ado, Dr. Sue Sicily.
Right now, you guys are really, really kind. Oh, good. You guys get to turn that down. Perfect. All right. So, Kurt's going to advance the slides for me. I'll go through these really fast because a lot of you, I apologize, those of you who are at the National Cannabis Summit and already had to sit through this. So I'm just going to pick out the really relevant stuff and try to talk with you guys about our saga of trying to get this veterans research underway. As this says, I'm based in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I've been there about 30 years now. I practice internal medicine and psychiatry. And if the next slide, I think, will tell you, let's see, yeah. And so I've been taking care of vets now for about 20 years in my private practice. I first met them at the Phoenix VA hospital, which many of you know is ground zero for the veterans wait list where all these vets died. It was continues to be a highly dysfunctional system. But I did work there for a few years and couldn't tolerate that environment, but just continued to see vets in my private practice, and that was the favorite patients I see every day. We have a very deep fondness for each other, which made me very concerned about the fact that we don't have any good treatments for PTSD. As any of these vets will tell you, been through the machine at the VA system. There's really only 2 meds approved for PTSD, and the rest are all used off-label. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that. Let's see and I'll just, I wanted to mention to you guys, many of you probably know that we were actually, I'm sorry, I'll use that. Yeah, you got it. Sorry about that. Thank you. Many of you guys know about how we've been trying to do this research now since 2010. We submitted a study design to the FDA at that time and got a FDA approval in early 2011. But here we are, 5 years later, still unable to implement this research. And so I'm just going to give you a glimpse of the barriers to trying to conduct marijuana efficacy research so that you're armed with information the next time people keep telling you, you can, we just need more. We can't possibly provide safe legal access to marijuana because we don't have enough data to support it. Well, this is why the data is being thwarted, and here's a perfect example. So you'll know that we were at the University of Arizona for many years. That's where the research was conceived in Arizona. But eventually, even though we had IRB approval, we got Institutional Review Board approval from the U of A back in 2012, but the U of A refused to find us a home for this work. And so we just continued to languish for years. You can't get a DEA license without having a specific location to conduct the work in. So that's where we really got hampered. So ultimately, this put me at odds with our university administration for so long, and finally, we ended up getting terminated last year. All 3 of my contracts were stripped on the same day without being given any due process, no fair hearing, and it is it is not uncommon, when you're at the forefront of some controversial research at a public institution, that you become a target. And unfortunately, now we've been floundering for a year and a half since then, trying to find a home for this work. Just so you know, since U of A failed to find to create a home for this, the other 2 universities in Arizona also walked away from this project. We approached all, we spent months negotiating with them. None of them would embrace this vital work. So I'm going to give you, some sense of what this research really is. I wanted to, Kurt, if you do the next one, I wanted to point out that the reason we've been fighting so hard to get this work done is because this code of ethics that says that we're required to obey the law, it also talks about how physicians are required to change laws that are unjust. And I think that marijuana research, barriers to this research are absolutely an abomination. They are, this is a classic case of science being shackled by politics, and we all need to be outraged by this. So I want to give you some more understanding of how this works. Next slide. So just so you guys know, I've never tried marijuana. I'm not part of the industry, meaning I don't own dispensaries or grows, and I don't write certifications. I'm just focused on the research and trying to get the science. So next slide. This is the study. This is the very subversive work we were trying to do at the university. Was an FDA-approved clinical trial looking at 76 military veterans with treatment-resistant PTSD. So that means they have to have failed meds or psychotherapy or both in order to be eligible to be screened for this. And next slide. Here's the strains that we're looking at, right? So this is basically, we're examining safety and efficacy of 4 different phenotypes of whole plant marijuana, and it's all smoked. So a lot of criticism for that, that, hey, you can't, physician, you're a physician, how can you allow this? And ultimately, it came down to the FDA, and the FDA approved a smoking protocol because the data on lung complications from marijuana is really not there. If you guys have looked at, if you ever get a chance to Google Tashkin, Dr. Tashkin in California did all the seminal studies. He's a pulmonologist out there who, courageously examined all long-term studies looking at marijuana exposure and does it cause lung cancer was the main question. And there was no evidence of increased lung cancer, of any kind of cancer. So this was a huge breakthrough for the marijuana community because up until then, right, everybody was arguing this is just another tobacco. But the good news is, there is some evidence. I don't want to make it too rosy, right? There is some evidence that cannabis can cause some pulmonary challenges like bronchial irritation. It can do that, and we all know that when you guys, if you smoke and you cough, and it does create some cilia paralyzation. But the truth is that the FDA approved a smoking protocol, which means that they couldn't have done that if it was, if there was any evidence it was dangerous. So that just should give you some more ammunition when you talk to people that they're clearly, they're not in favor of smoking, they're just recognize that it's not as dangerous as people portray. So the 4 strains that we're looking at are high THC, which is 12% THC. I know, that's pretty daunting, isn't it? That is what the federal government is willing to provide, 12%. So a lot of medical folks argue that this sabotages an efficacy study from the beginning, right? Because now suddenly, if veterans need more, they're only given enough to take 2 grams a day. So if they need more than that, if they exceed 2 grams, then they're left with nothing. So the tough thing is that, I don't know, we'll have to see how that works out, but that's what NIDA will sell us. Then there's a high CBD, which is 12% CBD with no other cannabinoids, and then there's a 1-to-1 ratio of THC to CBD. So we asked for 12% CBD, 12% THC, and NIDA has notified us that we're getting about 7%. So not optimal again, but this is the only federally legal supply, so we're stuck with it. So next slide, let's see. So this is how the study is broken down. We're going to be, basically veterans are going to walk through 3 stages. It'll take them about 12 weeks total, right? So the first stage, they get randomized to one of those 4 strains, including placebo. So some of these vets, 1/4 of the vets are going to end up on placebo. And you argue, well, how's that possibly going to work? What happens is the federal government actually creates a placebo from the plant that they're already growing. They alcohol wash it and leach out the cannabinoids and create a basically inert plant material. It looks the same, smells similar, but it's a little bit darker, and so that's what they get. So it's possible. Remember, we're looking for a good mix of veterans that are naive to marijuana and vets who are experienced. So it's possible that some of the new users may actually be fooled by the placebo, but we'll see. But after that, so they get 3 weeks of home self-administration, and this is part of the challenge that we had in getting the protocol approved, because a lot of people felt like, you can't give patients marijuana to go home with, because they're gonna divert it and sell it, and we all know the street value of federal government marijuana is so impressive. So they ended up, though, reluctantly agreeing only if the veterans they have to videotape themselves administering the cannabis every time. So if they do this 3 times a day, they have to take this iPad we give them and have a secondary verifier there who tapes them using the marijuana to make sure they don't divert it. And we're required to review all that video each week, which should be a fascinating job, I'm sure, watching all that footage. And only after we've reviewed it all and made sure they didn't share it or sell it, then we can issue the new week supply. So they come in every week. They're getting, a lot of monitoring through this time. The problem is, after 3 weeks, they get cut off study drug, which is, you can imagine, really risky. So they have to go through 2 weeks of abstinence, which is really concerning to me, because, I know from the vets who are here who've taught me about how they use cannabis. I'm really, I'm sure all of you are appropriately concerned about how they're going to respond to that. But during that time, we'll monitor them very actively for suicidal thoughts, for measuring their blood and vitals and all these things to make sure that they're staying healthy. And then suddenly they go into a crossover arm of the study where they get re-randomized into another strain. So if they were on placebo in stage 1, they end up on an active treatment arm now. They'll be on one of the 3. The placebo's gone in stage 2. So, and then they do the same thing, 3 weeks of home self-titration. They only take as much as they need, and then they stop. So if they take, they're trying to titrate the dose to take exactly what they need to control their PTSD, and then they're asked to halt. And then they're keeping personal diaries the whole time and document. And then in stage 3, they get back all of their unused marijuana. So that's their incentive to actually abide by the protocol, because they do get it back. Not that they want it, but I'm not sure how many of them are actually going to want that back, but we'll see. I'm really, really curious. I actually have no idea how this is going to pan out, because even though I feel that the data is very compelling to support cannabis for PTSD, I have a compilation of all of the journal articles, even the very recent ones that just came out in the last month, that prove the efficacy of cannabis, or I shouldn't say prove, but suggest that it's real therapeutic value. And we presented that material at Walter Reed. I don't know if you guys knew that. So Walter Reed Hospital invited us recently to present 3 hours of marijuana content. And this was so amazing to me, because my own Phoenix VA hospital will not allow us to do a simple presentation about the study and how medical staff can refer, vulnerable veterans to the study. If they have volunteers, why wouldn't they refer them? Well, they're not going to refer anybody to us if they don't know about the study. So we have been trying for many months. Matt and others have been trying to help us get our foot in the door there, and they still won't allow it. But amazing that the most important military hospital in the country, Walter Reed, allowed us to present all this material in all its glory, and nobody objected. So, I don't know. We'll still have to keep working on that. If any of you have congressional ties, and can help us put pressure on the Phoenix VA, we'd be really grateful. But anyway, this is going to be a fascinating. Let's see the next slide. Yeah, you can keep going. Let's see. Oh, this is important. So this is what we're measuring, right? The primary outcomes measure is CAPS. CAPS is the clinician-administered PTSD scale. It's the gold standard for measuring severity of PTSD, and it's the same tool that the FDA uses when they added Paxil and Zoloft, so we're using the same. And then we're also measuring all these other things. You can see sleep is on there. Do you guys see actigraphy is a portable sleep study that you wear on your, like a wristwatch, and it's really sensitive, and it can give you a lot of interesting data about how these veterans' sleep cycle is being changed by the cannabis, depending on when they dose. Obviously, it's home self-titration, so not all the vets are going to dose at night, but if they do, then we'll be able to get some interesting correlations. And next slide, and this is just basically, I think all of us here are probably proponents of whole plant, that we understand that pharmaceutical companies trying to isolate cannabinoids and thinking that's equally therapeutic is just a fallacy. The pharmaceutical companies have already spent billions of dollars since the endocannabinoid system was first discovered in the, the 80s, right? Raphael Mechoulam uncovered and continued to elucidate this all through the 90s. Yet, pharmaceutical companies have never been able to replicate the true efficacy of the natural plant. That's why their only hope is isolating cannabinoids. But we want to study whole plant because we believe that not just the entourage effect for cannabinoids. And by the way, I was telling these guys at the conference that NIDA just announced that they've identified their 138th phytocannabinoids. You can see how complex this plant is. You've got 138 phytocannabinoids working in concert with all these terpenes and flavonoids and other bioactive molecules that we may not even be aware of. It is so when you try to isolate a single cannabinoid, you're extracting the how do you say, taking the intelligence out and leaving the wisdom behind is the saying we use. So we're hoping, but what's really sad, and this is what you're up against here, and why the VA is going to continue stonewalling this, is because we never learned about the endocannabinoid system in my medical school, and they continue to block this material from the curriculum. So there was just a study published last week where they did a phone survey of 156 mainstream medical schools and just did, simply interview them about, do you know what the endocannabinoid system is? What does, is there any mention of it in your curriculum? And all of them, unapologetically said, no, we would never talk about that. This is a medical school. If you want to talk about that, you go to the Oriental Medical, or the naturopath school, so they're, very elitist about the fact that, there's a potential that a plant could possibly, substitute for all the myriad of really toxic drugs we give people every day. So you got to, we have a big battle because these mainstream doctors have never been exposed to the concept that every human body has an endocannabinoid system, and that it's the most important homeostatic mechanism in our bodies. They just don't hear that material. So now that's going to hopefully change now that we've got all these really unique outreach with Oaksterdam and other groups that are starting to put together. There's more and more mainstream medicine folks that are jumping into the fray, so hopefully we'll see something. But let's see the next one. Can you keep going, Kurt? Let's see. This is something I just wanted to show you. This is our co-investigator at UC Boulder. His name is Chris Lowry. He's a great faculty member there, and he studies biomarkers for inflammation. And I think we all know that cannabis seems to play a giant role in preventing and suppressing inflammation, the inflammatory process. So he's going to be, basically we're going to be drawing blood for him at baseline, throughout the study, after the study, to collect these biomarkers for him so he can finally begin to quantify how this phenomenon works, and hopefully we'll be able to answer some of your questions, because almost all illness, every human body illness is somehow associated with inflammation. So if this is the key, if this explains why cannabis seems to treat so many diverse illnesses, and we really want to get a handle on that. Let's see what else we got. Yeah, keep going, Kurt. Let's see. Yeah, keep going. Let's see all that. I told you how, I just wanted to make sure you knew. The study was submitted in 2010, and here we are, so many years later, still waiting for this study to get underway. Let me keep going, Kurt. Let's see. This is just, I wanted to just give you a glimpse. After we got FDA approval in early 2011, there was tons of media, celebrating the fact that we're finally going to get to study marijuana for PTSD, and still, we're still not able to start. And you see that I just wanted to give you some sense of how the universities run from this. So our university kept saying that it's illegal to do marijuana research on campus. They felt that it was that it would harm their federal funding. You all heard that story. And then you hear the other part that was less vocal but very present, was that we can't have veterans with PTSD walking around campus. I mean, how are our students going to be safe with these veterans, like ticking time bombs walking around? And I said, there was a meeting with all the deans, and I was so floored by the complete prejudice of these folks. And I said, I've been taking care of vets for decades, and I've never once felt unsafe around them. And I can assure you that, but then they said, well, we also don't like the optics of having veterans smoking weed on campus. We can't handle it. What's the media portrayals are going to be so damaging. So that was the list of concerns. That's not what they'll say publicly, right? They'll just say publicly that they love marijuana research, and they were just, it just wasn't good timing for them. So what happened was they continued to claim it was illegal. If you see the next slide, you'll see that we actually ran a bill because they said you're going to have to pass legislation to prove that it's legal for universities to do this work. And we passed that because it was always legal. Federal government, federally regulated research always trumps state. So we passed SB 1443, which reaffirmed that marijuana research is okay to do on campus. And then next slide will show you. But the university continued to block it, even though we got IRB approval in 2012, which usually means that they allocate space, right? They give you a lab or an office at that point. But they refused. And then ultimately, I had all these battles with the president. After the next slide. Yeah, this is President Hart. So battle after battle with her, talking about how, if I was studying the life cycle of the earthworm, I would have had lab space immediately after IRB approval. But even 2 years later, they refused to give us space. And then you'll see, next slide, let's see. Oh, and then we did this because we didn't know what else to do. We weren't making any headway. So we started a political action committee called Americans for Scientific Freedom, trying to eliminate barriers to marijuana research. It was a very controversial move because I'm a government employee. I'm not supposed to be politically active. That's what they said. I said, I'm a scientist that is allowed to hold political opinions, and I'm allowed to express them. And no university can suppress that. And so I want to urge, when you talk to people who keep telling you, I can't do this, my university or what won't allow me to do this, we need to step up and push that envelope at every turn, because that is just a huge suppression of civil rights. I was a half-time employee. I had plenty of time of off hours where I could be engaged in political activism, and so I didn't apologize for this, which put me further at odds with them, and continued to be, front page of the media all the time. And then next one, I think, will show you. And then, of course, we have a really unique situation in Arizona where we are holding onto a $9 million surplus. So it varies, you know, from 6 to 9 million, but from year to year, over the 5 years we've had a medical marijuana law, we've been accumulating the surplus. Not one dime of it can go to marijuana research. So it gets voter protected. So the legislature can't sweep it. It just keeps getting, you know, growing. And it's very frustrating. So that's part of what put me at odds with the legislators, because the veterans and the medical community decided to run a bill in Arizona that would allow a small portion of that to be allocated to clinical research. We said, look, isn't it negligent to sell 80,000 cards to patients and not do a lick of marijuana research or clinical research to understand how they're responding to this? And they, you know, didn't buy it. And then the next slide will show you. So we started, you know, the veterans began these wonderful campaigns. This is the first time I really saw veterans become politically active in our state, and it was really thrilling because we had very diverse vets from every nook and cranny of the state coming together, holding rallies, writing emails. They put together this campaign. Next slide will show you. Then there were opponents who came out against the veterans. This is the MATFORCE, is the Association of County Attorneys. Doesn't surprise you, right? They created a campaign called Marijuana Harmless, Think Again. And it's like this brainwashing, you know, where they run around brainwashing electeds from all over the state trying to, and they didn't let anybody into these lectures, but you had to be an elected. And then they tried to, you know, make sure that they knew the rhetoric of drug-free Arizona and all that. And then after that, this is what we ended up with. So after all this acrimony, and right before I got terminated, they offered us this space. And you can't really see this, but it is a completely dilapidated hole that has asbestos all throughout the floor and ceilings. And I have a bunch of video footage from this because I was so fascinated that they thought this was okay. You know, if you were a cancer researcher, you get the shiny laboratory, you know, a $10 million lab. But if you're treating veterans, you end up in this, you know, disappointing. But I was willing to take it, you know, because we would have taken anything at that point. But you'll see in the next slide, we ended up, of course, you can keep going, we ended up getting fired, and then, of course, they don't call it fired. It's called non-renewal of all of your contracts. But we ended up, you know, suddenly being able to shine a giant spotlight on the barriers to marijuana research. So getting, you know, terminated was a huge blessing for our movement to try to build awareness. And then suddenly, I don't know if this next slide shows you, but yeah, then suddenly we got a partnership with Johns Hopkins and this incredible gift from you guys from the state of Colorado. That was unbelievable investment. And we were, you know, really shocked because this is the first time we'd ever received government money. MAPS has been around 35 years. My sponsor, MAPS, they're a nonprofit who they do all the psychedelic research, and they'd never received a government grant ever. So this was tremendous. And then you'll see the next slide. We'll show you the other things. If you guys haven't seen all of the myriad of really important subjects that you're studying here in Colorado. They basically took, I think it was $9 million, plowed it into 9 vital projects, and you guys are going to be the purveyors of the most important cannabis efficacy research in the country. They did not allow, this is the beauty of the bill you passed, you did not allow any money to go to study safety because you knew that the federal government already does that relentlessly. NIDA, that's all the only funding available is to study harmful side effects and addiction potential. All of this is looking at efficacy of marijuana. It's the only government money in the country at that time to do that. So let's see. So basically, I just wanted to share with you a quick, and then I want to turn this over to all these other great people here. But I want to just show you how legislators view cannabis research, right? So this article, they did an in-depth investigation where they, you know, started to try to uncover what really happened, because the university's position was, hey, you know, we non-renew contracts all the time. It had nothing. Dr. Sisley's performance was always exemplary. Had nothing to do with her. It was just, you know, it's just that time of year and budget constraints and all that. But what ended up really happening was this state senator did not like me. And you'll see why. If you do the next slide, this was a bill he tried to pass. It was like page 100 something of the bill, where he buried this language at the bottom that says no general fund money will ever go to support marijuana research at universities. So this could have been incredibly damaging to science, for years to come in Arizona if this had passed. And it would have passed because, who reads page 120 or whatever there. So this was a problem. So no taxpayer dollars would ever be allowed to support marijuana, which means you couldn't use a phone, you couldn't turn on the lights there, nothing to help support a project. So when my friend who's a policy analyst there showed this to me, of course I shared that with everybody who would listen, and everyone descended on him. This is not just any state senator, but the Senate president. And then you'll see on the next slide that he, media asked him, why would you do this? And he said, because I don't believe that there is such a thing as marijuana research. I believe that this is all sham science, and that all of this, so-called studies are designed to promote legalization. So that's what you're up against, is the hyper-conservatives amongst you, amongst your electeds, really do believe that we are going to thwart the data somehow and try to use that in a legalization campaign. They feel that any data that sheds light on marijuana's efficacy or legitimizes marijuana as medicine, that any of that data must be suppressed. And that is a tragedy, because this is, our elected officials are supposed to be guided by data, right? We don't want them making decisions all the time on emotion. So we've put things, I want you guys to know that we are aware of human bias. I mean, that's why our study team is very mixed. I'm the only one who's never used cannabis. The rest of the team has tried it. Some of them enjoy it. We have one lady on the team, maybe Paula Riggs, and maybe you guys have, she's a child psychiatrist who often attends the PTSD hearings, and she's at the UC Denver Medical School. She is, proud to be a marijuana prohibitionist. She is on our team. She is in charge of data integrity. So she is going to be scrutinizing every aspect of this study to make sure that it is pure, that it is, the data is beyond reproach. That's so important to me. I know that a lot of people are arguing that I'm just an activist now and I can't possibly be impartial. But the truth is, I really don't know how this data is going to turn out, partly because we're using NIDA marijuana. So it's kind of a crapshoot. But I will say also, though, we've put in mechanisms into the study, just so you know. When I say this is a triple blind study, I want to make sure you guys know what that means. Everybody is blinded, right? So the veterans have no idea what they're getting. The investigators, the physicians have no idea what any of the vets are receiving, and all of the independent raters are blinded. So it is impossible to thwart this data. It was possible in other I've done tons, for years out of residency training. I did studies for Big Pharma, where I was frequently pressured to make data look good, to make their data look favorable. And it was nauseating, and I'm so happy to be in an environment now where my sponsor has committed to putting all of the data into the public domain. So the good and the bad of marijuana will all be published for everyone to scrutinize, and that way we can have an honest discussion finally. There are so many studies that I worked on for Big Pharma that never saw the light of day because, of course, if they did not make data look favorable, the drug look favorable, they were never seen. They were put in a drawer, and that's not what we're doing. So for those of you, who hear people say, she's biased. Even if I was biased, we have plenty of mechanisms between Dr. Paula Briggs, triple blind, FDA, and IRB monitoring relentlessly. There is no way to fudge this data. And so we are going to hopefully, bring you data that is absolutely unassailable and that will be, we hope, published in some really prestigious peer-reviewed medical journals so we can finally answer these questions. I did want to share with you, there was recently an article that came out refuting the efficacy of marijuana for PTSD. And so it's important for you to know that. It came, I think it was out of Yale. It was a study, if you any of you... it's finally been published, and I've been getting, tons of inquiries from reporters who, of course, want to know and so my response, and I will be happy to provide this to Kurt. I'm guessing you probably have their emails, so maybe we can disseminate, because it's important for you to hear what the opponents are saying so that you know how to respond. One of the challenges, though, with that study is it's an observational study, right? So that's exactly what the Board of Health said. They don't put any credence on that. But an observational study can be, it's up to the viewer to judge somebody's clinical response, and human beings are inherently biased. So I would argue first that it's a small study, it's an observational study, but it reaffirms why we're so desperate to get this underway, because a randomized controlled trial is going, it's the gold standard for medicine. We need this. So I wouldn't put too much credence on that, and I think it'll die out quickly because it's not, like a supremely well-designed study. But I will definitely forward that to you. And I want to yield the stage to my incredible colleague, Matt Kale. Come on up here.
I was assigned to the 101st Airborne Division, 1st of 506 Infantry. When I got back, I thought I was fine. I thought I was perfectly together. I was gravely mistaken. 10 months after I got back, I attempted suicide for the first time. I woke up in the hospital 48 hours later knowing that something was seriously wrong with me, but I continued to deny it to my friends, my family, my unit, even myself. And I deployed again. This time I was medevaced. After that point is when I got the official diagnosis of PTSD. I was in the Wounded Warrior Battalion, which essentially you're given the best care that the military has to offer. That essentially means a long list of psychiatric medications. It was horrifying. It sucks the life out of everything. You're not able to think correctly. You're not able to do much at all. When you're under the influence of the medications, sometimes you're extremely erratic. You can be screaming at the walls 1 second, and the very next second be nodding off in the middle of a sentence. It's no way to live, and it's an easy way to drive almost everybody out of your life. I was in a pit of hell for several years after I got out of the military. I isolated myself. I didn't have any contact with any kind of friends, and actually most of my family too. I was isolated from my own emotions. I couldn't connect with my children, and eventually a high school friend, one of the few I hadn't driven away with my antics, he approached me and said, "Hey, listen, I've read some stuff, and I think you should give it a shot." I immediately thought to myself, why would I add another drug to my already extensive regimen? And he came back with a very reasonable answer. He said, "I'm not your doctor. You try it. You don't like it, you don't ever have to do it again." So that made sense to me. I tried it, and within 5 minutes I knew. Every single time I visited a VA doctor after that point, I would take my list of medications, which is almost a full page, and I'd just go down the list and start marking stuff off and slashing other things in half. I think I made my VA doctors pretty nervous. I was on an extremely wide variety of substances, everything from antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, anti-anxiety drugs like benzodiazepines. I was on opiate narcotics, also several other neuroleptic drugs designed to eliminate seizures. I was on so many medications, between 15 and 20, depending on the given month, that my liver started to shut down and my kidney started to shut down also. It was literally killing me. I was dying before everyone's eyes. Sorry. My name is Matt Gale. I moved to Colorado in June of 2013. I started cannabis therapy then. I came from an illegal state. I'm officially a marijuana refugee from the state of North Carolina. And Colorado has been kind enough to welcome me in and accept me as one of their own, which I'm grateful for every day because so much has changed in between now and when I was in North Carolina. I was struggling quite a bit. You heard some of my story there. And actually, I planned on, I see a lot of these public speaking engagements as almost a little bit of group therapy for me. So I had kind of thought about going into a little bit more detail about how I got to this point. And once the presentation starts up, I'll be able to take y'all there and let you know essentially how to treat various military injuries with cannabis. Over the course of the past 2 years, I've been treating veterans now since 2013 with cannabis, and I've accumulated a lot of anecdotal information, which is something that Dr. Sisley can't really talk about because she's a clinical doctor and she needs clinical evidence. But honestly, the majority of our information out here is anecdotal evidence, and that's the kind of stuff that will point us in the right direction with this plant. Anyway, like it says here, I'm now with an organization called Veterans for Natural Rights. I've been part of a number of organizations since coming to Colorado and become disillusioned with quite a few. There's a number of different approaches, but honestly, in order really to get it right, I think I've got to go off and start my own organization, which we'll be telling you about a little bit later on, and the sort of things that we need from the community in order to get veterans independent and taking care of their own needs, medicating themselves, diagnosing themselves, and treating themselves. Anyway, next slide, please. So there's a few pictures. Anyway, military injuries, common military injuries. Go ahead, next. Keep going. So TBI, this is one of the primary military injuries that you'll see from veterans coming back. It comes from blasts, any kind of head wound, closed or open, concussions, post-concussion syndromes. Ischemia is something that not a lot of people know about, but it causes the majority of damage in TBI. The initial trauma destroys certain parts of the brain, but really what causes the most damage is the oxidative stress that happens after the injury, and then the anoxia, the lack of oxygen to those brain areas, and you end up getting a lot of secondary die-off in the brain from TBI. That's one of the main ways in which cannabinoids can help, because almost every cannabinoid has been shown to be a neuroprotectant. Common with TBI, cognitive deficits, reading, memory, comprehension. After I got back, after my medevac, I actually lost the ability to read for quite a long period of time. I didn't know it until I picked up a magazine, and I had no idea what I was looking at. It took a very long time for me to try to get that back, but I'll tell you all how I did it. Next slide, please. So next kind of injury is nerve damage, neuropathy. Amputations, phantom limb syndrome is something that is very common with amputations. You get pain or other sensations from the limb that's no longer there because your brain still thinks it's there. It still has all the wiring there for that limb. That limb is just not there. So unfortunately, your brain still creates sensations in that limb. Spinal injuries is most of us that actually deployed in any kind of combat capacity, and some not in combat capacity, have spinal injuries, which causes a lot of neuropathy. Gunshot wounds, of course, shrapnel, and of course tinnitus and hearing loss is something. It's also nerve damage. It's not as easily treatable, of course, but it is some kind of nerve damage. Next slide, please. Of course, PTSD. This is really the crux of the issue now because, go ahead, hit it one more time. The common statistic is 22 vets a day kill themselves due to PTSD. This is really, really low. Less than half of the states actually reported, and two of the states that did not report are Texas and California. Texas and California are home to about 20% of the veteran population in the United States. So really the number is probably closer to 50, maybe even 60, 70, who knows? But we don't know that yet. So I just say more than 22 a day. Next. In the general population, this is actually not very well known, but in the general population, civilian suicide, 112 a day. 112 a day. You can see that the vast majority of people that actually suffer from PTSD are not even military members. We just suffer it at a much higher rate. And actually, we suffer from a lot of medical conditions at a much higher rate than the general population. We're exposed to a lot of stuff, whether it's toxins, chemicals, depleted uranium, and of course, skeletal stress, injuries, you name it. We're exposed to almost everything that the general population is, except in much higher quantities and higher rates. Next slide, please. So, the military recipe for PTSD. This is how it went down for me. I had my first deployment in 2008. We deployed to Kapisa province and then to Wardak province. We had a lot of combat, almost daily. And there were a lot of things that happened during that deployment that didn't really register for quite some time with me. And go ahead. When I got back, I was extremely isolated. I didn't quite know what was wrong yet. I thought I was all right, like I said in the video, but I didn't know what was wrong, and I started isolating myself. It got worse and worse and worse and worse until I eventually sought out help from a doctor, and they started the prescription regimens, and that's when things got even worse for me. That culminated in a suicide attempt in December of 2009. A couple days before Christmas, I lost hope, and I consumed almost every bottle of medication in the house, over-the-counter, prescription. I just went through the entire house looking for things to kill myself, and actually it was actually the over-the-counter stuff that hurt me the most. I was unconscious for about 48 hours, woke up on Christmas Day. My wife and son came in to see me, and the over-the-counter medication actually did a lot of damage to my system, much more than some of the other medications did. But anyway, go ahead, next. I pulled it together mainly for the other men in my unit, because I personally still didn't want to live, but I didn't want them to die. And it was my job, because I'd already been deployed, it was my job now to train these new guys coming in and look out for them when they were over there. So I was not going to shirk my duties and possibly get men killed. So I pulled it together and I deployed again in August of 2010. Go ahead, next. So on the 13th of October, 2010, shortly after I deployed, was our first KIA, a medic by the name of Jordan Bird. And if you notice the date, 13 October, that was just a couple days ago. Jordan, he was our medic, and not only myself, but a lot of other men owe our lives to him. And I'm thankful every day for what he's given. I was also medevaced on that mission. We were going out to actually pick him up, but that was 2 days ago, 5 years now. So then shortly after that, of course, 21st of October, we lost my bunkmate, Staff Sergeant McInich, and then shortly after that, we lost my Alpha team leader, Sergeant Solo. And I actually, when he was medevaced, he got back to the same hospital I was in Landstuhl, Germany, and was able to hold his hand briefly before they pulled the plug on him. They had run 260 some odd units of blood through him, and they just couldn't keep him alive anymore. So his parents were actually on the way back, or on the way to visit him, expecting to see a live person, and unfortunately myself and the officer and the chaplain, the two guys who were supposed to break the news, I was there too, and a lot of it fell onto me. So anyway, go ahead next. This right here, this is Staff Sergeant Kenneth McInich, Diego Solozano, and next. And this is the medic we all owe our lives to, Specialist Bird. He's 19 years old, and he had a baby approximately a month before deploying. That baby was 4 months old when he died. Next slide. I was assigned to the Wounded Warrior Battalion, where, like I said, they give you the best medical care the military has to offer. It's a bunch of drugs. And next. So I got back, and I was in the Wounded Warrior Battalion, but I desperately wanted to go back to Afghanistan because I had men dying right then. And so against doctor's orders, I signed myself out of the Wounded Warrior Battalion. I went back to my unit. I was still on all these medications. I was in really bad shape, and of course my unit said, well, no, you're not going anywhere. You're staying here. That was devastating, absolutely devastating to me. And that led up to a point where actually, not even my wife knows this, but I attempted to commit suicide again. And I was attempting to hurt myself, and the thought came to me, if I found an artery, what would happen? And I started to hurt myself, and when I realized what I was doing, I called my wife, and I was scared, and I didn't know what to do, and I asked her, what am I going to do? She said, go to the hospital. So I went to the hospital. So I voluntarily checked myself in the hospital, but my unit put me on an involuntary hold for over 40 days because they were essentially scheming. The only actual visit I got from a member of my chain of command was my rear D company commander, rear detachment company commander. He came in to tell me that I was unfit for duty, and his intention was to chapter me out of the Army. That's while I was on an involuntary hold in the hospital. That was the only visit I ever got. So after that, I was like, I absolutely have to get out of the hospital because my ETS is coming up, which is my natural end of time service. So I had to get out before they were going to do that to me. So in order to get out, I actually had to go on a hunger strike. Lasted almost 2 weeks. Eventually, they did let me out. I started clearing, but unfortunately, next slide, 2 days before my natural ETS, the paperwork came through, and I was summarily chaptered out of the Army for attempting to commit suicide 2 years prior, and 1 deployment ago, and 1 medevac ago. So despite the fact that I deployed again and then was medevaced, they weren't really kosher with me trying to kill myself. So they determined, since I was unfit for duty, they were going to chapter me out. So I got boot. I got the boot. Next slide, please. So treatments for these conditions. There's a lot of drug companies out there. Go ahead, click again. So they give you opiates, they give you antidepressants, they give you antipsychotics, they give you things called mood stabilizers. Mood stabilizers are a really, really wide and diverse category of medications. None of them are chemically related, and honestly, doctors don't really know what they do. Most of them are prescribed off-label. None of them are really prescribed for what they're meant. And they're prescribed essentially willy-nilly by the medical establishment for all these kinds of things. They all have horrible side effects. Go ahead, click more. Neuroleptics, those are designed to eliminate seizures. Benzodiazepines, also designed to eliminate seizures and anxiety, and stimulants. And I can tell you, I've been on every single one of those. One more click. One more. So I tried to make a list of all the medications that I've been on. As you can see, it starts up here. It actually goes up above that screen, and if you can see down here at the bottom, there is a comma at the bottom. This does not fit on one page. These are all the medications that I've been on after my medevac. This is obscene. And like I said, they shut down my kidneys, they shut down my liver. They were trying to kill me. Go ahead, one more. Problems. Go ahead, click it. Of course, the medications, most of the medications they prescribe, they don't really work for what they're prescribed for, and they overprescribe them horrendously. You can see the list of medications on the previous page. Side effects are horrible. Most of the medications they give you are to counteract the side effects of something else. Some of the side effects are the exact same thing that you're trying to avoid. Suicide, that's the big one. Most of the medications you're prescribed for PTSD come with a big giant black box warning say you might kill yourself if you take this. That's what we're trying to stop. This is not acceptable in the medical establishment, and honestly, it reveals a serious deficit in the way psychiatry has been practiced. It's kind of a crapshoot. You know, they have a giant list of medications, and they'll go down that list, and they'll check off the boxes and try you and all these things. Did this work for you? No. Okay, well then try this one. Did that one make you rock in a corner and chew on your tongue? Then okay, we'll try something else. You know, so it's pretty debilitating, and that causes isolation. Isolation, that's something I really want to talk about. Go ahead, hit the next slide. One more. So isolation is probably, I think it's one of the primary symptoms of PTSD in general that I've seen. And I think what we need to do is we need to broaden our idea of what medication actually is. There's stuff, you know, like intrapersonal stuff, things like diet, you know, if you're putting in you're trying to build yourself up, diet, meditation, writing, art, yoga, exercise, all these things, they're medication. This is medicine. This works. Then there's, of course, your external stuff, the canine, equine, farming therapies, anything that gets a veteran out of his own mind and thinking about the well-being of someone else or something else, whether it's a plant or an animal, it gets them out of their own issues and suddenly caring for the well-being of another person, and then they're required to be okay for the benefit of that other living being. So that's crucial in all this. And there are some plants that we can turn to help us out. Cannabis is, of course, the main one that we're talking about today, but there are others out there like ayahuasca. But whatever breaks the isolation of a veteran could possibly save his life that day. So whatever it is, it doesn't matter what it is. Get him out of the house, get him together. It doesn't matter if it's a grill out, it doesn't matter if it's just, excuse my language, bullshitting with the guys. But it does not matter what it is. If you can get him out and you can get him together with other vets, you can save his life. Next slide, please. So cannabis, we all know and love. Cannabis is not a magic bullet. It's not going to fix all your problems immediately. However, go ahead and click. It is a synergistic shotgun. It will blow away a lot of problems if you just let it and you use it as that synergistic shotgun. You have to combine all kinds of elements within cannabis to get therapeutic effects. And this is the same with almost every plant medication out there. Go ahead, one more. How do you know what cannabis strains to use? Click. So there's so many out there, right? I mean, gosh, there's purple ones, there's green ones, there's black ones, there's red ones. Good Lord, what do you do? Indica, sativa. Click one more. So everybody knows the common conceptions, indica, sativa. You know, sativas are up, indicas are down. Click one more. Everything you know about strains is wrong. Strains have been hybridized willy-nilly for quite a long time, and the actual difference between sativa and indica is almost nil anymore, and the vast majority of effects that are attributed to sativas and indicas are actually due to the terpenes and other compounds that are in it. The cannabinoid profiles are actually quite similar. Go ahead, next. Lab results are really the only way to know what's in your medicine. And click one more. So the cannabinoids, as you can see, there's quite a few, and these are, like Sue said, how many is it? Like 148, something like that now? Something crazy. But these are the main basic ones. Most of them come from the precursor CBG. Other ones come from a slightly shorter chain, CBGV, but they produce them all. Next slide. First one, the one that we all know and love, THC, right? Who loves THC? That's right. We all love it. Click one more. This is the primary psychoactive ingredient in cannabis. It is a CB1 receptor agonist. CB1 receptors are primarily in the brain, but they're actually all throughout the body. And this is the primary reason why it's highly psychoactive. It's absolutely needed for efficacy in mental health issues and TBI, because if you have an issue with your thoughts, your emotions, and your mood, how are you supposed to fix yourself if you can't take anything that's going to change your thoughts, your emotions, or your mood? You simply can't do it. You need that psychoactivity in order to break these PTSD cycles, and the stimulation actually promotes neurogenesis, which is what we all need in TBI because we've damaged our brains. So we need to grow back portions of our brains. One of the side effects of high levels of THC is anxiety. Next slide. Brings me to the next psychoactive cannabinoid. This one I love, THCV. Click one more. This actually increases the psychoactivity of THC, but it has a paradoxical effect, because even though it increases the psychoactivity, it decreases the anxiety that's associated with that high THC level. So you can maintain that high level of psychoactivity and yet decrease the adverse effects from the THC. This is really crucial for me, and I sought it out when I first got here to Colorado, and I found it a lot in East African land races. Next slide. Cannabinol, the third psychoactive cannabinoid, and go ahead and click one more. This one is a very underrated cannabinoid, and it's not really found much in many strains because people don't age their marijuana. But when you age marijuana or you expose it to light or oxygen, you can change a lot of it into cannabinol. It is psychoactive, and the main good thing about it, it is the most strongly sedating cannabinoid, and it can induce sleep like nobody's business. This stuff is magic to put you to bed. So it also has, because it's a sedative, it has anxiolytic abilities, and it kills pain. Next slide. Cannabidiol. This is our first, quote, non-psychoactive, and go ahead, click. The non-psychoactives, that's actually a misnomer. They're not actually non-psychoactive. There are plenty of CB2 receptors in the brain, and they do attach to them. They do change your consciousness. It's just not as profound. But this has a wide variety of issues. Many of these non-psychoactive cannabinoids, they're very, very powerful anti-inflammatories, and they're much more important in TBI, especially if you're fortunate enough, well, I shouldn't say fortunate, but if you're fortunate enough to be a civilian and get a TBI, then you can actually use cannabis right after the TBI. And the non-psychoactive cannabinoids are extremely important for the treatment of TBI, especially acutely, because of all of their anti-ischemic abilities and their abilities to actually reduce the inflammation. Go ahead, next slide. Cannabigerol. Now this sucker right here, when I added this to my regimen, my cognitive improvement, I think it must have tripled or quadrupled overnight. Go ahead, click it. This is probably the primary cannabinoid that's shown to be beneficial in TBI. And between this one and THCV, I think this has really, it's allowed me to be myself again. I can now read whenever I want to. I can read even scientific journal articles and gain a lot of information from it. Retention is good now. It also relieves pain, but it, despite being, quote, non-psychoactive, it actually is psychoactive. You just have to take it in higher quantities. Okay, next slide. Cannabichromene, this is the last one. It's another non-psychoactive, and this one though, I kind of call it, I call it the great potentiator, because if you look down here, it basically does everything that we want to hit. Neurogenesis, depression, relieves anxiety, relieves pain, and it increases bone stimulation. So it can heal broken bones, and it can do all that other stuff too. That's almost everything that we want out of a cannabinoid. This cannabinoid, if you add it, if you can find it in anything and add it to your regimen, this will kick it up many notches, not just one. Next. So there's a lot of other entourage agents in cannabis, terpenes, fatty acids, and sterols. Those are the most common fat-soluble compounds, and these are all pulled out by most extraction techniques, butane, propane, those kind of things. They pull these substances out quite well. But there are other substances like flavonoids and anthocyanins, and for the most part, they are water soluble. You're not going to get these from an extract, and honestly, you're probably not going to get a lot of it from smoking it in general. If you really want to get a decent dose of these, then you're going to need like an ethanol extract or an oil made using something that pulls out water solubles too. Ethanol is my favorite. But the primary reason why these are really important is because they're powerful antioxidants. So in the short term with TBI, you can really do a lot of good by adding flavonoids and anthocyanins to the mix. Okay, next. U.S. Patent 6630507, the U.S. government, they have patented cannabinoids as neuroprotectants, specifically for, as you see down here, following ischemic insults, including trauma, the big one, traumatic brain injury. So next slide, if the government has a patent on cannabinoids as neuroprotectants, then why the heck aren't they prescribing them for active duty soldiers when they get TBI? This was actually published and accepted in 2003, the year we went into Iraq. Seems a little coincidental, don't you think? Anyway, why aren't they doing it? Click again. I really don't know. There's no telling why they're not doing it. But next slide, please. There are barriers to access here in Colorado. Go ahead, click it. In December 2014, you heard us, Sue, we were fighting for her funding for a study. $2.1 million we got, and 9.1 for all the other studies, all the studies in aggregate. One more click. However, in July of this year, the Board of Health denied PTSD as a qualifying condition for a medical marijuana card. And as you know, that's an extreme disservice to not just every veteran, but there's a huge quantity of people in the general population who have PTSD too. And it's essentially flipping them the bird and telling them that they're not really worth the time of our government. Next slide, please. This is me last year with my ponytail before I donated to cancer, harassing Governor Hickenlooper about PTSD being added to the conditions. Turns out he's a nice guy, but unfortunately, he's not brave enough to step up to the plate and make it happen. He has complete control over the Board of Health. It is an executive branch agency. He can do it anytime he wants to, but he has yet to do it. Next slide, please. Then, of course, there are other barriers. The lack of clinical efficacy studies, and of course, Sue here. I met her in December, and I can't say I've ever been prouder to share a stage with anybody else in my life. She is more of a warrior for veterans than I think many veterans have ever been a warrior for her. And I am proud to stand with her and fight for PTSD and marijuana access. So thank you, Sue, and thank you all of you for letting me talk up here and ramble. That's all I have. Thank you.
Time. So if you have any questions, point them out, and we'll try to dive through them. Anybody? Questions? Answers?
From the 12% to what it might be if it was real marijuana?
Yeah, unfortunately, it'd be tough in a randomized control trial. Except we can make, in the analysis after the data is all locked down, we can try to draw some conclusions based on certain subjects who don't respond and things like that. But the goal is going to be to end the NIDA monopoly. The DEA monopoly is doomed, and it's so clear. We have so many expert growers in this country who can grow cannabis to spec for research in a timely way, not like us having to wait 18 months for marijuana. So I think that ultimately we can't go to phase 3 on this study with NIDA marijuana. So ultimately the government has to start licensing other growers. And if you guys heard recently, Nora Volkow, the head of NIDA, admitted in a U.S. Senate hearing, she testified that the DEA should license other growers. So we have some unlikely allies now. Kevin Sabet from Project SAM, is that the right name? Project SAM, who's the biggest marijuana prohibitionist in the world probably, has acknowledged that we need to license other growers. And so nobody thought that would ever happen, but the truth is that he believes that this marijuana research, of course, is going to confirm all of his thinking that marijuana is so dangerous. So he wants the barriers to be lifted so that we can collect more safety data on how harmful it is. But yeah, so I don't know if hopefully this study is going to take 2 years, and then another year to crunch all the numbers and get it published. So but within 3 years, we must have another supply, because we can't go to market with marijuana that's grown by NIDA. That's in the Controlled Substances Act. They are only allowed to grow marijuana for research. And if you guys don't know, a lot of people make fun of us trying to get through the FDA process. They think, well, this is such a waste of energy, because the FDA is never going to approve marijuana as a medicine. But I want to share with you how close we really are, because this study is an early phase trial, phase 2. If the data from phase 2 looks favorable, the FDA will allow us to go to phase 3. And after phase 3, that's when drugs get on the market. So really, within 5 years, we could have data from phase 3 and possibly have an FDA indication for whole plant marijuana to treat PTSD. That would be a huge game changer, because suddenly you have an opportunity to force insurance companies to subsidize this drug, right? They'll be forced to put it on formulary. Now, they may not put it in a great tier, right? They may put it tier 4 and make it a really high copay, but still, a high copay each month is going to be better than probably what most of you guys are having to pay here to buy your marijuana monthly. So I think that's ultimately our goal. MAPS, my sponsor, has been committed to keeping whole plant marijuana in the nonprofit sector and making sure that we, as we move toward a potential pharmaceutical grade cannabis, that there is this opportunity for whole plant to stay nonprofit, to be on insurance formularies, just like Israel. Have any of you guys seen? Israel has 2 out of the 3 national health plans cover whole plant marijuana in various formulations. So I spent, a day with the vets in Tel Aviv where they were in a marijuana distribution clinic. They were coming to pick up their monthly supply, and I was just stunned by the fact that these guys, could get anywhere from 120 to 200 grams of cannabis each month. And it was not just legal for the vets to possess, but it was fully subsidized. It was completely sponsored by the Veterans Association there. So all they do is get their they buy it, they take their receipt, and they get fully reimbursed. And the other country we all know of that's already doing that already has this sort of progressive approach is Canada, right? Same thing. And so Why is it that these two countries, I remember when we talked in DC, we met with the Office of National Drug Policy Control, and we said, why is it that these two, respected countries, the federal governments there, feel that the evidence is adequate to support this, and we don't? And they put their money where their mouth is, and they actually pay for it. Why is this? Nobody can answer that, but I think our goal should be over the next year to try to uncover the suicide data from Israel and Canada and see if we can compare, because if there's any way to make a correlation, that data is not easy to find. We've been searching and scouring around, and it's hard to get. It was a miracle that the VA even put out the number 22 a day last year, even though it's an absurdly low estimate. It's still impressive that we actually got a data point finally. We haven't been able to get that yet but I think that if you guys have a mind to do that, please, feel free to start asking questions of your colleagues and because this should be public information, right? Data on suicide rates should be available to the citizens of every country, so we should be able to get that, but we haven't yet.
Question.
Is there a way to put some kind of an inner colorant in the other three test marijuana so that they all look different? So you're not going to say, they look about the same and this one looks different. Guess which one's the placebo? So if they all look like red, green, orange, blue,
Right.
then you don't know which one is what.
It's a good point. Ideally, though, nobody will see the other people's cannabis. Ideally, the vets aren't, the study subjects won't be sharing, and so I don't think we'll have a huge issue with people looking at each other's cans saying, wait, mine is darker. But regardless, that's not a approved part of our protocol now. So, but it is a really reasonable idea. I don't want to deflect that. And I like how you're thinking, because you're trying to figure out how to get around this ridiculous situation. Good
Matt, please give us an update. I know that we've exhausted everything we could, so we had to go to the lawsuit. I know that you guys got together. I would like to hear a little update where we are now, what's next, and what is the outcome that you're hoping through the lawsuit, or what you'll see happen?
Outcome-wise, complete reversal of the decision and permission.
And if anybody's not familiar with the lawsuit, can you go?
Okay. So after the decision by the board on the 15th of June or July? June. Almost immediately afterwards, when the executive branch, Board of Health or CDPHE, when they failed 3 times to approve cannabis for use in PTSD, and then the legislature has failed at least once to pass a bill, you're left with only one branch of government, the judiciary. And the judiciary is supposed to right wrongs and perform justice. This lawsuit is not, it's not something that we necessarily wanted. This is a last resort. We don't have any other options. People are dying literally by the day, and we don't have time to wait for this. So in the interest of saving lives, we're filing a lawsuit on behalf of all PTSD patients in Colorado to try to completely reverse the decision of the Board of Health and allow PTSD to be used to allow cannabis to be used for PTSD throughout the state for all patients. So that is what we've started. Our law firm, Hoban and Fiola, they were kind enough to take this on, and they've done a fantastic job. But unfortunately, right now the state has initiated a number of delaying actions. They're supposed to give us a reply within like 21 days. And so far, I think there's been 2 different delaying actions, which none of us really knew what the mechanism for these things are, but they managed to dig it out of the laws and the rules somewhere. So they delayed it twice now. Hopefully this is the last time, and we'll receive an answer in another 30 days. It's actually already been a few, so maybe it's closer to 20. But we'll see. I'm crossing my fingers. They can only delay so long. Eventually they're going to have to give us an answer. If they deny us, that gives an avenue to appeal up and take it to a larger forum. Eventually, if they deny it on the state level entirely, we'll take it federal. But that's where we're headed with it, yeah.
If can I mention too, if any of you guys run into Bob Hoban and can thank him, because as I want to echo what Matt said, we interviewed a lot of law firms, and none of them would take the case. And they took it pro bono, and this could be a very long process, a long commitment. So if you see Bob Hoban, he's an expert in hemp law. A lot of the hemp activists know him, and I think we're all really grateful that he's done this, and hopefully we'll get some justice here.
So there are so many strains out there. How are you going to determine which strains to use for these studies?
Oh, that's a great one. I think that's the million-dollar question, right? Is how do we figure out which strains are best for which illnesses? This is just one study looking at PTSD, but we have so many other studies that we'd like to do looking. My next study we're working on is using cannabis as substitution therapy for opioid dependence, which is certainly an incredibly important area for the opioid epidemic we got. So this study, that's the reason it's designed so broadly. We look at 4 different strains, including a placebo, and we get some rough ideas about which phenotypes might be best, and then we drill down in the next phase. So the FDA may not allow us to go to phase 3. If the data isn't really crystal clear, then we may end up going to a kind of a phase 2B, where it's sort of a intermediate step to further clarify that. But that's how you do it. It's just, administering the drug, collecting data, trying to answer all the questions that everybody's got about how do you select a strain for what illness, other than just trial and error every time. So,
well, let me give that a shot there. At least in my own experience, especially for PTSD, like I said, the cannabinoid profiles of many of these commercial strains are almost identical. Bunch of THC, very little anything else. So essentially what you're looking at in difference in strain is terpenes. The main terpenes that you're going to look for PTSD are linalool, myrcene, nerolidol, terpinolene, beta-caryophyllene. Each of those has some effects in sedation, anti-anxiety, or cannabinoid potentiation. So those terpenes right there, those are the things you're going to have to look for, and that's why lab reports are so important, and why especially lab testing medical marijuana is so important. We got this lab testing out there for rec, and it's kind of shoddy, but why are we testing rec stuff and not medical stuff? The medical people really need to know. So that is, in short, I would look for strains like that.
Brett? Is your study strictly looking at using active THC from a psychosis effect, or using the ability to test for raw cannabis? Movement right now, juicing with 10 leaves a day, so you can get a higher cannabinoid without the active THC.
Yeah, no, that you've raised a really good issue, and I hope in a future study we'll be able to do that. But this study is all smoked cannabis, so we're going to ruin the opportunity to do that. But it's such an important point. I mean, we see all these patients now using, juicing smoothies successfully and being able to be totally high functioning during the day, but still manage all their, pain problems and stuff. So I'm really fascinated by that issue, and I want to see us dive into that as soon as possible and study that. Good point. Oh, yeah, sorry.
That's where, for me, I understand it more as like a botanical. And is there any, are there any opportunities for researching as a botanical in its raw form?
Yeah, you mean before it gets vaped or burned or whatever? There definitely are. It's just we chose not to do, because we were trying to do sort of a real world study and replicate how vets are using cannabis now to treat their PTSD. So this was, but in the future, I do hope to do. I agree. This is a really important area. A lot of people don't want they don't want smoking or vaping or edibles. They want to just, like you say, edible. They want an oral form that may not be as psychoactive. So I love that idea. So, yeah.
Anybody, I've been kind of hearing some talk about doing a class action suit, and then you get a lot. Right.
Yeah, this is kind of the first step. What these guys, Kurt, Matt, Stephen Otera's not here, I don't think. Who else is in
Zach
this?
Phillips.
Zach is here, yeah, and Larissa Bolivar is our is our civilian, and she, so that's pretty close to a class act. These guys are representing you in this suit, and we'll see how far they can get in the court system to get justice. But it's a good, I think, we'll see. That's why you got some really expert lawyers who will be able to help these guys navigate and figure out if they need to go to federal court and take it all the way, then that's what they'll do, I think. I wanted to ask Matt, too, if he could, is there a way you can talk about the concept of the collective, the Veterans Growing Collective?
Yeah, actually, me and Kurt were going to get to that here in a bit.
Yeah, we want to ask a question.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, something over here, maybe?
I was just wondering how much oversight do we get to see how the night goes their marijuana? I mean, can you see if they apply pesticides to it, which could lead to undesirable side effects like nausea and other psychoactive effects too?
Right. No, it's such an important issue. We have not been able to get them. NIDA, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, doesn't disclose any of the elements of their drug master file. So we've asked them over and over, and we've had lawyers submit FOIA requests, and they refuse, and it's really disheartening because I feel a duty to the veterans who are volunteering that they should at least know the conditions that the plant was grown in. Was it pesticide-free? They claim it's organic. That's all they would tell me. And I said, what does that mean? It means 20 different things to whatever grower you talk to. So, we don't have any proof of what organic is. So I think this is another area of that should outrage us as taxpayers. We just spent $68 million. The NIH just handed NIDA another grant for $68 million to perpetuate this incompetent monopoly. And the fact that they're not willing to disclose the growing environment, I don't even get terpene profiles from this drug. The only data we get on the study drug, these 4 arms, is the THC to CBD ratio. We don't know terpenes, flavonoids, no other molecules. And we intend to do secondary testing on this ourselves. But, it's just concerning that they failed over and over again to provide the transparency that taxpayers should be guaranteed. So.
And the interesting thing about that is that $68 million, that purchased you 1,450 pounds of marijuana from the federal government, essentially. 1,450 pounds for $68 million. That's pretty steep. They're not doing a very good job growing their marijuana.
Yeah. Can you imagine? Yeah. And the men, too. The men would really champion this if they could help.
Actually, it was one of the most widely prescribed substances prior to prohibition for feminine issues of all kinds, whether it's hormone replacement or dysmenorrhea. It was one of the most commonly prescribed medications for that.
Yeah, if you look at the U.S. Pharmacopoeia, the list of hundreds of conditions that they believe marijuana treated, yeah, Matt's right. It said point blank, dysfunctional uterine bleeding and the sequelae associated with the mood problems, things like that. And then the PMS is also listed there, not as PMS. It's a different description, but it was even back then they acknowledged that this had tremendous value in the gynecologic area.
Right.
So a pharmaceutical company is just using a product. Would they have a 2-week abstinence period at research? Because that seems like you mentioned the cannabis would be quite dangerous. And I can imagine a pharmaceutical company doing that or trying to test that.
You're right. They don't. And that's why we're trying to be intellectually honest about, we want data about the withdrawal because so many opponents keep saying that there is a very defined withdrawal. And we're trying to tease out, is this with drug withdrawal or is this that the drug was therapeutic and suddenly we've stolen it from them and now they don't get it. So we're hoping to get that, but you're right, there's no way a pharmaceutical company, would they design studies, they ask the questions specifically to make sure that their drug, not to highlight any bad side effects. So you're right, they won't ever examine that. Maybe for a day, and a day, most people can get through a day, but not more than that.
Erica?
So I guess what I'd like to know is from a civilian perspective, what are the things we can be doing? Because most things are citizen-led that actually move the needle on this stuff. What are the things we can be doing, even especially outside of the cannabis community, like as for-profit businesses, nonprofits, etc., to like move this stuff forward when I think if you ask the majority of citizens, they would be for this and they would want to see this happen. What are the things we could be doing concretely to shift this thing?
I mean, first of all, harass your lawmakers for one, and don't just pick the ones in your state government, and don't just pick the ones in the federal government. Bother them all, local too, and just have them push it on up the ladder. I would harass everybody you possibly can. It's a numbers game with moving the political needle. It's about how many people call them and express outrage and disappointment over something. That gets their ears perked up, and it gets them to start listening. If enough citizens actually call in and bring up a topic, and then somebody like myself or Sue comes in and says, hey, listen, I want to talk to you about this, they're not going to turn us away if they have been properly primed. But if they haven't, they could very well dismiss us.
And do you see other groups who are benefiting from the medical end, like families of kids with cancer and things that they're starting to see real genuine progress? Are they kind of like joining forces, or are you guys feeling like you're still kind of fighting that fight solo?
I've received a lot of support from all sectors. There's not a single sector of the cannabis patients community who hasn't stepped forward in some way, shape, or form to take a stand, especially for PTSD. It is kind of like the seminal issue of this particular time period in America, just because we're getting over an extremely long period of war, the longest period of war we've ever been at. This is an extremely prominent issue in everybody's minds, and I'm eternally grateful for the people around from all sectors, whether they're parents of kids with Crohn's or IBS, or whether they're people who have epileptic kids or other seizure disorders. Everybody seems to be on our side and standing together with us, and likewise myself with them. I'm down to fight with them for anything, and I think that's the way we should all proceed as a community.
Is there a way to figure out, like, once you have a consumption, a regular consumption, and then you completely stop it, and is there a way to do blood tests where you're natural, like, kind of have a hard time speaking?
Yeah, you're doing good, yeah.
But how the cannabinoids, like, kind of become active, where then it's using your reserve.
Oh,
And then,
that's
like, is there a way to do a blood test like that? Because then
that's tricky,
you can kind
yeah.
of see how long it would take you to get into deficiency.
Right.
And then you'd have to.
Right. It's a good point. I would say right now the only blood testing we have during the abstinence period, for instance, is we're measuring the quantitative, and monitoring the quantitative data as it drops out over the course of the 2 weeks when they're abstaining. And then we'll of course correlate that clinically to their personal diaries as they describe their symptoms, see if we can figure out what's happening. But we don't have anything more sophisticated than that right now because it's only phase 2. But that's a good suggestion for future phases.
Would it be like a way for people to volunteer though? Like, so that you
To
could
do that.
put it in a volunteer?
You could. You just they won't let us. The protocol is so strict. They don't even have a provision for volunteers. I've got a lot of vets that want to help, just support vets during that rough period of the withdrawal. And they won't let it, you can't, they think it will adulterate the data if certain vets get support and others don't. And so we have to, it's a really interesting problem. So, yeah, but I know what you're saying. It doesn't make sense. But certainly there's a lot you guys can do. If you're here in the industry, for instance, if you're growers and dispensary owners, there's a lot of opportunities to do observational studies. And now, that's what I was going to say when the young woman asked about what kind of activism you can do. I was going to mention that I would put a lot of energy into chastising your universities about why they're not doing more cannabis research, not just here. I mean, obviously Colorado's made a $9 million investment, but they could be doing so much more. There's so many questions that need to be answered. And if you are from, some of you guys I know are from other states, so I wanted to mention that, if you're in other states and you can point out, universities have lost their soul. That's what they used to be about. They used to take pride in doing the hard research, the controversial stuff that you couldn't do anywhere else because it was so potentially caustic or whatever. And universities are running scared from all of this work now. Even the University of Colorado initially put out a note, scaring faculty and saying, we don't really want to participate in this. Then they did reverse that slightly, like in a vague way. But it's tough to be in a university, in a publish or perish system, and to be able to get research underway when you don't have supportive admin. So I think we all have to demand, these are all taxpayer-supported universities. They need to hear from us that we want them to start answering the serious clinical questions of our time, and stop focusing on the life cycle of the earthworm, and although that's important, but I mean, or shrimp on treadmill, whatever they were saying, all the, I think that there's so many patients here that are suffering, and we have such a golden opportunity to do numerous observational studies that aren't so costly. And I was going to mention that, today I went, if you guys know Nick Easley and Andrew Stoll, those guys came with me to CSU Pueblo, where they invited us to, they miraculously, I'm no longer blackballed from the university system, so they've offered me an academic appointment there. But the good news is that I was able to bring these guys down, and because they don't have a clue how to embark on marijuana research. And so these two are going to teach them how to implement a cultivation site, and maybe even create certificates of hemp management where they can attract, because right now their attendance at CSU Pueblo is really down and there's a lot of poverty there, and we're hoping that we can create a hemp center of excellence down there and really try to show the state and the nation how the myriad uses for hemp. We're going to put it into real practice right away, whether it's hempcrete or other textiles or whatever. So I'm really, keep an eye out for that, because I think that's going to be coming quickly, and that's a good sign that universities are recognized. This was probably going to be funded through an allocation from sales tax revenue of marijuana. So finally, the county commissioners in Pueblo are acknowledging that they've made enough money off marijuana that they can start doing innovative projects. So I think there's no reason, once that model, it should be approved in the ballot in November, and once that starts, then you'll have a precedent set where you can go after all these universities and start bugging them. So,
Eric, sorry.
Question, do you have any MRIs within your studies? I'd be interested in seeing what the brain scans say as far as the activation of the amygdala and limbic system, and activation of transient hyperfrontality, so on and so forth.
yeah.
Or where would we go to find?
Unfortunately, the data we have with functional MRIs is all from NIDA. So you can imagine how it's skewed to say that, remember that study that came out last year where they said it causes brain damage, and there's all these structures in the brain. The amygdala is shrinking and is odd-shaped now after casual use. So, so we have a really crazy situation now where the data that's there suggests that we unfortunately can't include that. But the functional MRIs are really expensive, and we'd already maxed out our budget on all the other testing we had. So we couldn't include that, but it's an early phase trial, so I'm hoping in phase 3 that we could have that if we had enough funding. If the VA you know, it's going to be unbelievable. If the data from phase 2 looks favorable, and it shows that veterans are benefiting from cannabis if the VA doesn't step in at that point and fund the entire phase 3, that would, you know, we should all be furious about that, because VA cooperative studies happen all the time. Sponsor, you know, where we pay, you know, VA pays pharmaceutical companies to understand all the, you know, incredible benefits of lithium and Depakote and all these lousy meds. And so we need to make sure that we keep a close eye. When phase 2 data comes out, if you think it looks compelling, we all should be demanding, go to Secretary Robert McDonald and tell him to stop, you know, building buildings all the time. We have all these empty buildings in Arizona now where they don't have any operating expenses to fund the care there, just sitting there, and they could instead be funding real research. We, of course, approached them, and they wouldn't touch this, but fortunately, you know, Colorado saved the day, so.
Yeah, last question.
Kind of a statement, but thank you very much. But I don't know if you've heard today that Obama has, or the White House has decided to continue the war in Afghanistan. They're not going to be pulling out in next December like they had initially planned. Israel has asked its people to pick up arms because the fighting has intensified, and Iraq just showed a wonderful video of a silo with nuclear warheads moving through it with their folks all hammed up and ready to go. So the very, 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 very sad thing is, and I'm ashamed for my country for what we have put our soldiers through. I'm a vet as well. Mom was a vet, grandfather was a vet. But it is amazing how many more generations and how many more thousands of vets are coming after what you have been through, and it's going to get worse. Your subject base is about to get extremely large.
You're right. Right.
Just be respectful of everybody's time. Sorry, we're cut questions off. But we'll do one more, just to be respectful of everybody's time. But just one more question, we'll wrap it up.
Is your study going to be based on yes, cannabis works for PTSD, or you be looking for a specific cannabinoid profile or cannabinoid profile range?
Both, yeah. So the first question is, does it work? And then if so, which strains are best? And maybe which strains should be avoided? Because of course there's a lot of hysteria around high THC causing psychosis. That was that article that came out the other day. So so we're hoping to begin to, you know, shed light on that. But that's a great point. Yeah, we're starting, our hypothesis is we believe that marijuana will reduce the symptoms of PTSD in a dose-dependent manner. The higher the dose, the more efficacy. And we believe that CBD-rich marijuana may be the most optimal, but we don't know. That all needs to be tested, so.
Okay, so now we're talking about how we're going to move forward on this, and please make sure you do sign in so we have your email, and we'll send you action items as well. And Matt here is going to talk about the program he started and how to support that.
So you know, Veterans for Natural Rights is the organization that I'm attempting to start. For the most part, its focus is lobbying and giving veterans a voice at the table in the halls of power. You know, kind of a subsidiary organization that we're starting is something called the Pride. You know, Pride being lions, of course, a symbol of courage, and it's founded for soldiers to make them more independent and self-sufficient, so that they can begin to diagnose their problems, they can begin to design treatment regimens, growing the plant, providing them with the grow equipment, the materials, media, nutrients, you name it, and then also providing them the expertise, the knowledge to be able to grow this plant proficiently for themselves, so that they actually have the ability to treat themselves. So that's the goal of this group, the Pride. And right now what we need, we've got a number of pledges from some Colorado Springs area grow shops. We've got 8 spots available for veterans at a grow class there. We also have got pledges of well, it's actually out now. I think it's up to 10 full 1,000-watt units, but we still need 400, 600, and 1,000-watt metal halide and HPS bulbs. We need ballasts in 400, 600, and 1,000-watt, preferably digital, grow tents, flood tables, soil, ventilation fans, cloning supplies, pots, nutrients, even gift cards for grow stores for veterans. Any of that would put veterans in business, actually making their own medication. And if any veterans here you want to learn, get in contact with me and we'll figure it out. We are dedicated to trying to make every veteran that we can completely self-sufficient and independent from the entire dispensary system and any governmental control.
That's awesome.
So in addition to that, at our war also, we do creative outlets and alternative therapies. So we try to help veterans through any kind of outlet we can get our hands onto. And that's where we're working with Matt and Dr. Cicely to get information in front of veterans so they have options. So please stay in contact with us. We have our email. I'll go ahead and thank Dr. Cicely for being on board.
Thank you guys.
Matt Paul for the amazing presentation, very amazing. Congratulations to Sundance for helping organize this event. And if you post one for allowing us to be here tonight. Without them, it wouldn't be possible. And thank you all so much for coming out. I think it's a really great starting point. I think we have a long road ahead of us, but I think we're able to make a lot of progress after tonight. So if you don't mind, please grab your chair. We're gonna put that in the back room back here. We're gonna clean up. I'm gonna be upstairs for another half an hour or so. You guys want to talk about what we do here. We have an art class tomorrow night and live music here also. So if you're around, stop by tomorrow night. We'll be teach people how to paint. Free for veterans, of course. And we have a variety of events here as well. So grab a calendar, grab some information, and please stay in contact. Thank you.
Yeah, cool. Good job, buddy.
Kurt thanked a lot of people for being here tonight.
Yeah.